Actually, the one thing I didn't expect to learn in CPE 333 most recently was the difference between the processor and the graphics department. Or cards rather in a computer. The processor itself, you might have heard like quad core, 6 core. Those are, if it's a quad core, it means there are four large sections, each of which can handle like one, maybe two instructions at a time. They're large, and each individual one handles one instruction. So if a processor is being fed instructions, it can handle 4 at a time. And typically, anything being sent to the processor is more complex, but the processor having the larger cores can handle that. The way a graphics card works, it is only really ever asked to do relatively simple arithmetic operations, like most commonly floating point operations. Flops is what they're called. And those don't require a super large die size to do. So what a GPU does is it has thousands of very, very tiny CPU cores in it. So it's very, very good at taking in a lot of simple instructions, and the reason it's good at graphics, each pixel, to find its color, requires that a floating point operation is done. Kind of. Requires that a simple arithmetic function is done. So having a ton of individual cores, each of which is running 1 or 2 pixels, it's much, much faster to have a ton of very simple cores than throwing that through the processor. It's why there is a dedicated graphics section, both in your laptop and in an Intel laptop. Would have like a integrated graphics is what it's called. It's a designated section of the CPU which has tons of tiny cores in it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And we, as part of my, not any of the labs I did, but we learned about the differences in operating costs and what would be useful or what would be best to give to a GPU, graphics processing unit, versus a CPU. And is there a middle ground that we can use for our purposes? And if so, what would be the best? It all depends on what you're asking it to do. But still, it was nice to be able to learn the exact differences. It's also why graphics cards are so good at, or so useful for mining crypto, because all crypto is, mining crypto that is brute force breaking encryption. And that again is a pretty simple arithmetic process. It just needs to constantly be running, check, is this right, is this wrong? So having a ton of cores running all at once is the best way for you to be able to theoretically mine crypto. So I found that interesting.
Yeah.